Rain, very excited. It's coming out October 19th. Benjy, Joe, Sean, James, the writers. Only on Max. Oh yeah, I'm Joe Bennett.
So Joe Bennett.
Sean Buckelew.
Which way you guys want to start? Yep. Okay. So Joe, my question is for you.
Okay.
Based off the acclaimed sci-fi short Scavengers, you created with Charles in 2016. How did the idea come about to spin it into a full series, and how has the story evolved?
It started with I was just interested in kind of a visual narrative that had no dialogue, and watching the process of these characters kind of figure out a sort of Rube Goldberg machine on this planet. So it was making up this nature and creating this world, and I think that was ultimately the main challenge. And then kind of building this arc that was trying to do it without any dialogue. And so you'd watch them kind of go through these trial and errors. Moving into the series, I think it was like cherry picking a lot of inspiration from the planet that the short was based off of, but then adding sort of these additional, characters and then kind of giving more of a backstory and all that stuff. And then eventually the story arcs kind of thread in between, later on and that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm gonna chime in.
No.
Yeah, this question's for you.
That you're dealing with at any given moment, and that I don't know, it allowed you to do kind of like each arc could be sort of simple, but then when you try to think about the moment where maybe all three climax at the same time, I think that was when we tried to be like, how can that thematically relate, or what are you trying to like build up to?
A lot of just like, what is the intention for this shot? Like, let's try to. We were sort of like, how do you trim fat on something later on? And it's like, okay, well, if you can like distill the significance of each thing as much as you can, even if it's kind of ambiguous, and
Yeah, and this is actually, Benjy had a very big guiding principle, Benjy, the Supervising Director, of like always like coming in and out on each storyline with something exciting. Like the first shot and the last shot should always be a fun transition. And I felt like it was just, and then it's like extrapolate that to every, like each little set piece, but then also obviously the beginning and the end of the episode, So I felt like it was a fun, I don't know, but I think that actually made our jobs easier, where I feel like if you had to have this same show, but it's stuck with just one plot line, that would actually be more of a challenge. So I felt like it was fun to have it be, you've got the completely characters that aren't aware of each other in completely separate places, like just allowed for kind of like, this storyline can be one thing that's completely different from what in this storyline it's all threatening, and this storyline it's kind of chill or whatever, Yeah.
One of the things that stood out to me was the sound. The sound was immaculate. And I guess that's really important, being that like the miniseries, the short was originally like there was no talking. So I guess adapting it into like the full series and now having voice, the sound still really makes an impression. I guess, how was it working on the sound for you guys?
Great. We worked with this guy Axel, and he was phenomenal. I mean, he did such a great job. I think it was a lot of like, just because it's an animated show, wanting to get as much tactility out of things and understand like the texture. When a person, like in the trailer, when he's rubbing his hand against the tree, you want to like feel what that tree is like.
Well, I was going to say, and this is something that Joe would often encourage. Joe was directing a lot of the sound in very particular ways, but I feel like it was sort of like, I remember there being a lot of like, subvert the expectations of what the thing might be. So if it's a huge thing, it doesn't necessarily make a bell, like it's like trying to be like, it's not exactly what you'd expect, just trying to do something kind of interesting with each thing of like, no, it's got a unique sound that, I don't know.
Yeah, like don't just go with the default sort of sound that you would think this thing makes. Like, I mean, just there's a lot of referencing from just nature that already exists. I mean, we ran into a funny thing where it was almost nearly impossible to come up with something in nature, like in this planet, that doesn't already exist in nature in some form or fashion. Whether it's like look, volume, sounds, it's kind of there. So we were sort of like, all right, well, let's just cherry pick from a lot of that stuff. And it's like, the build of a certain creature, I mean, you know, we talked about, like, I mean, even just the sound design of Jurassic Park, where it's like, again, the Velociraptors, that was from an elevator door, you know, aluminum foil ripping. It was like, really, like, let's kind of explore that in a huge way and not just hit, like, this is a lion roar, this is a whatever.
For just an example, in a later episode, there's a sort of predatory creature, but the main inspiration was like a music box, so it's like a ballerina music box, just because we're like, oh, it like has this tantalizing sound that disarms you, but then it's like a creature that'll fuck you up.
This is
just fantastic and like supportive of us trying to do this thing in the exact way that we wanted to do. So that made it a lot easier. Where if somebody just didn't get the initial premise of the whole thing, that could have been just a nightmare. And so we were really lucky when we got to work with it.
Congratulations, guys!
Thank you so much.
Thank you, appreciate it. Hello.
Hey.
It's like speed dating.
Yeah, that's exciting. You got to live up to that too. Really good.
Yeah.
you guys. How are you?
Hi.
So I guess my question is, how did you kind of decide to go with this premise? Like, I know you've worked on like Love, Death, and Robots, and I guess what are some of your like inspirations, like when sci-fi creating this series and going with the route of animation?
Well, I can't really speak to the creation of the series. James was in the writer's room, and I came on board after episode 1 had actually been wrapped. So James.
I mean, variety of inspirations for me personally. The sci-fi from Solaris.
I say Solaris too. I swear to God.
Magnetic Rose, Sorcerer, which is like in a William Friedkin kind of similar narrative structure of it's a cast of characters you don't know much about going to a point and converging. Let's see, what else? The film Manchester by the Sea, which is not a sci-fi film, actually was a big inspiration that we talked about a lot. 28 Days Later.
They brought up Manchester by the Sea, and it's like the best pitch for a movie I've heard ever. It's like, okay, I'll see Manchester by the Sea already.
Oh my god. So you've been over this film already,
Yes, but it sounds great.
That's all. Jurassic Park was a big one. Yeah, just kind of like our favorite, I would say, adventure type of stories, but also just like films in general, and trying to put them into art, language, and form, and tell a compelling story.
And what's so fun, I mean, everybody from the storyboard artists to the compositors are all science fiction fans. What was so fun about this was just playing against type in a lot of ways, like trying to do things with this story that had the trappings of science fiction, but it's really just like Solaris. It's like a human story and being as human about it as possible. And there's just so much fun stuff to draw in science fiction. But in the end, all we wanted to do draw was really, human characters.
It's like the best science fiction is like when it's using the trappings of the genre to actually sneak in stories. Like Solaris is about memory, but it's like, well, how do we explore that? We make a sentient planet that brings memories to life.
Exactly.
One thing that really stood out, the creature design, like you guys talked a little bit about it in the panel. I guess, what was your process doing the scientific research? Like kind of the process of like creating like this planet and all these different creatures and plants and life?
A big part of the show that Joe probably talked about was being inspired by nature documentaries and this idea that if you go, in the deep sea of the Mariana Trench, you're going to find creatures that basically should be on our planet. So there's really nothing you can make in a science fiction environment that doesn't feel like there's some kind of analog on planet Earth. So it's really a respectful kind of ode to the diversity of the Earth. And our effort to be as creative as evolutionary biology already is. That was the goal.
Yeah, I remember years ago just going to Joe's house and watching like nature documentaries all night. And we decided to think something, he's the creator, and then he's just always loved. Also, like, from writing, like, I remember one day in the writer's room, this giant tarantula came in that was terrifying, that inspired creature, dreams, something that no one else had. It was like, just, imagination.
The little white and black thing reminded me of like Lilo and Stitch, but like a freaky little thing. I don't know what he's doing.
You're talking about what happens in the first episode, but when he came in and that character's name's Hollow, we call him Hollow. When they walk off together, that's such an iconic image. Just this like lonely man, brainwashed by. I read somebody describe him as a monkey frog. and just like that storyline is one of my favorite storylines in the whole show, and it is so bizarre, and the internal logic of it is so well crafted that you're brought along for this very bizarre relationship, and it's so plausible in a totally outlandish way. I love the monkey frog.
It's cute. Was there any kind of like, I guess, conflicts or challenges switching from Adult Swim to HBO Max? Like any constraints, or you had full creative freedom, like on anything you wanted to do?
We had great feedback. I think that, James can speak to what the notes you got in the writers room. It was always a positive experience.
Super supportive and collaborative, and they brought tons of good ideas too. Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, and it's nice to have a very experienced sounding board when you're doing something like this, to show the cuts of the episode and to get feedback that actually does improve the show. And nobody really feel like we weren't getting a chance to make the show we wanted. It was more, how do we make the show work even more successfully?
And it did feel risky though. Like I don't know how many episodes you guys have seen. There's some strange turns that happen. So like when handing in those scripts, like, oh boy, I hope this goes through.
Well, Max would be the right place for that.
Yeah, totally.
The legacy of what Max did. I felt like we were entering into a world where sophisticated storytelling was part and parcel of what they already do. So.